Yo, what's going on, everybody? It's Bax here. Welcome to the channel. Here, my first ever video. Basically, we'll get right into it. This is a class project for me. I'm a junior at Southern Wesleyan University, MediaCom major, and I love just talking about sports, basketball, football, baseball, you name it. And I'm even a soccer athlete here at Southern Wesleyan. And this is a class project. Teacher said, you can either film your debates, debating stuff like politics and economics and stuff like that, or you can make YouTube videos talking about whatever you want, persuading people about whatever you want. So I picked the YouTube route. I picked to talk about sports here. And my first video here today is the NFL QB bracket. So basically, for those who don't know, this was kind of a crazy year for the NFL and starting quarterbacks. There were 66 starting quarterbacks. So I put it into a bracket, a 64-team bracket, kind of like March Madness. They got 64 teams, and then you got the play-ins. But since there's 66 quarterbacks, I had to have the two play-in QBs, and those are Aaron Rodgers versus Clayton Tune, and Jeff Driscoll versus Carson Wentz. So it's ranked based on passing yardage. So the highest overall seed is Tua Tagovailoa, the Miami Dolphins, because he had the most yardage. And then those guys I just mentioned, Rodgers, Clayton Tune, Jeff Driscoll, Carson Wentz, those are guys that pass for, in some cases, like Aaron Rodgers, did not complete a single pass on the year, and then Driscoll and Wentz, and then they completed very little passes. So it's seeded based like that. You got the four different, I got my bracket right here. That's what I'm looking at, guys. So when I look over to my right, that's what I'm looking at, my notes and my bracket. So I got it all organized into a bracket, and we're going to use that to determine the best quarterback from the 2023 season. So let's get right into the video. Starting off with the play-in games, Aaron Rodgers versus Clayton Tune. That's not really, we won't spend a whole lot of time on the play-in teams because those are kind of mid. Aaron Rodgers, obviously a better quarterback than Clayton Tune. So I got to go with him, but that's not really going to matter much because I got to go with Tua over those two. And then on the other side, Jeff Driscoll, Carson Wentz. That's Carson Wentz, probably the better quarterback, but just like that, not a whole lot of sample size from this year. So this bracket is based on this year only. It's not based on past seasons, your full career, potential Hall of Fame, potential Super Bowls. It's based on who was the best quarterback this year. And I'm filming this January 29th, so the day after the NFC and AFC championships. So that is taken into consideration. The playoff seeding is based on regular season passing yardage, but the whole bracket is based off your whole season for 2023, 2024. So we got those out the way. I'm going to put in now like the bracket for the first round. Then we'll jump into just like some of the best matchups. We'll do that round by round by round until we get to our champion. So starting with the first round, a pretty good matchup here, a pretty close matchup to start off in the top left of the bracket. Kenny Pickett, Nick Mullins. Kenny Pickett of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Nick Mullins of the Minnesota Vikings. And I went with Nick Mullins here. Only 700 less yards, but 200 fewer attempts than Kenny Pickett here this year and 7 less games. And he did have a higher QBR as well. He's very much a gunslinger. We saw that in some of those games late on with the Vikings, most notably that last Lions game. He had some struggles taking care of the ball there, but also some bright moments making throws down the field. A lot of INTs. But Kenny Pickett, only 6 touchdowns, only 6 passing touchdowns this year in 12 games. And late in the season, they went to Mason Rudolph. When Kenny Pickett got hurt, Mitch Trubisky, I love my guy Mitch. I got the UNC jersey on. Sam Howell, we'll get to him later. Mitch Trubisky was not good the one game they let him start, so they went to Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph is actually really solid, and they stuck with him into the playoffs. So I got Nick Mullins just because Kenny Pickett, he kind of lost the job to Mason Rudolph late, and Nick Mullins had some really bright spots despite all the interceptions, despite the Vikings not making the playoffs. So I went with Nick Mullins there in round one. Moving down to the bracket, Kyler Murray, Joe Flacco. That's a pretty even matchup there. Kyler Murray, of course, struggling with the injury this year, and Joe Flacco coming on late, coming out of, I guess, retirement. I don't know if he was really retired, but he came on late with the Browns and led them to the playoffs. I went Joe Flacco in that one. I honestly thought that Kyler was good. I'm not a big Kyler believer. I'm not a big short quarterback believer, even though I am a Saints fan, and Drew Brees is not the tallest QB. But I'm not really a Kyler believer in general. I'm definitely not a Bryce Young believer. But I did think that Kyler was pretty good this year. 3-5 in his 8 games, but Joe Flacco 4-1 in his 4 games, and that only loss. This was in the regular season, by the way. Of course, they lost to the Texans in the playoffs, and Joe Flacco was not good that first round. 4-1 in the regular season, and that only loss was that first week that he came in and against the Rams and against a good Rams team. That was the Browns' only loss with Joe Flacco in the regular season. So I went with Joe in that one. And then moving down, Sam Howell, Tommy DeVito. Just mentioned my guy Sam. Love Sam. One of the biggest reasons I got into football, actually. And I have to go with Sam. And this is not even bias right here. Of course, I have a lot of bias with Sam and with UNC. But with this matchup alone, Sam Howell versus Tommy DeVito. Tommy DeVito had a good three-week stretch. But Sam was really good for like the first 12 weeks. So the sustained play of Sam was longer than of Tommy. And of course, their bad was really bad. Sam had some really bad moments down the stretch. Tommy DeVito had some really bad moments over the stretch. But I go with Sam just because his sustained period of good play was longer than Tommy DeVito's play. And one thing I'll never forget about Sam, he led the league in passing yards for like 3 weeks. And certainly gave me something to brag about here at school with my guys. And one of the worst offensive lines in the history of the NFL with the Commanders this year. And unfortunately, they're probably going to be looking for a new quarterback coming up next year. And I guess we'll see what happens with Sam moving on. But I go Sam there in round 1 over Tommy DeVito. Moving along, Bryce Young and Mason Rudolph. That's another really close matchup here in the first round. You get a lot of those in the first round with those 8-9 matchups, 6-7 matchups. Those are really, really close, like they are in the NCAA tournament. Those are your close games. But I went Mason Rudolph here. Mason Rudolph didn't play a whole lot, so his stats are not great, but 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and a 118 QBR in those 3 regular season games. And overall, of course, we know the struggles that Bryce Young had, just 2 wins for the Panthers on the year. So despite Bryce really being the guy for all, but I think just the one game he was injured with that they started Andy Dalton. Overall, Mason Rudolph was just really solid for the Steelers, coming in as a 3rd string QB. And getting some wins late and leading the Steelers to the playoffs. A really good close to the year for the Steelers. Obviously, they didn't get the win over the Bills in a tough environment and some tough weather. But I do think it was a solid year for the Steelers. And the closing play of Mason Rudolph was a big part of that. And then a couple of interesting matchups that we have in the bottom right of the bracket. We got 2 matchups in the first round of quarterbacks that are on the same team. So we got Will Levis versus Ryan Tannehill and Geno Smith versus Drew Lock. Those are both first round matchups of 2 quarterbacks that are on the same team. And I went with the guy that started late in the year, and Will Levis and Geno Smith. Drew Lock had that one great win for the Seahawks against the Eagles, but Geno Smith, another solid year for him. Not as good as last year. Did take a little bit of a step back. Seahawks didn't make the playoffs this year, but I thought Geno was really good again this year. And Will Levis showed some flashes for the Titans and showed maybe he could be the QB of the future down in Tennessee. Moving on now to the second round, a couple really good matchups. You got your 1, 8, 9s, your 2 seeds playing 7 seeds, and then the close ones are the 4 and 5s. And we got one of those to start off here in the top left side of our bracket. Jalen Hurts versus Gardner Minshew. Gardner not the guy to start the year for the Colts, but when A-Rich went down, Gardner actually was really solid and kept the Colts in playoff contention for most of the year really for all of the year until they lost that Saturday night game on the final week of the season to the Texans. But I just think that Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, of course, they didn't do what they wanted to do in the playoffs. They didn't get back to the Super Bowl. But Jalen Hurts, another great year for him, was in the MVP conversation for most of the year. Sort of tailed off as the Eagles tailed off, but they had a great start to the year. I think they at one point were 9-0, maybe 10-0. I didn't write that one down. I probably should have, but the Eagles were really, really good over that stretch. And I go with Jalen Hurts, and that one, of course, the tush push inflates his rushing stats and sort of declines his passing touchdowns and stuff because they've been so effective in the QB sneak and getting him into the end zone. But I go with Jalen Hurts and that one. Moving down, Sam Howell, another tight matchup for him here in the second round against Josh Dobbs. Josh Dobbs beat Brett Rippon in the first round. Pretty easy matchup for him to go ahead and move through. But Josh Dobbs, just kind of like Tommy DeVito against Sam Howell. Sam's sustained good play was longer than Josh Dobbs. Josh Dobbs was good for like 2 weeks with the Cardinals. And then another like 2 weeks with the Vikings after they first traded for him. But really, once defenses started to figure out him with his new playbook, him with his new wide receivers, it was not good after that point. So I go with Sam Howell here again. Sam Howell, I did his little spiel in the first round, but I do think that the same kind of point stands, is that Sam was good enough for long enough to knock off Tommy DeVito and Josh Dobbs, but he won't move on past the second round. Don't worry. This is not a UNC QB Sam Howell video. This is an NFL QB video, so the UNC bias will sort of slow down, and you guys will see. I do know ball for sure. Bax knows ball. Bax talks ball here on the channel, but I got Sam Howell moving on to the Sweet 16 here in the bracket. Our last sort of key matchup here in the second round, two guys or one guy that we sort of talked about in the last round, Geno Smith versus Russell Wilson. Russ going up against his former team's new quarterback is a really tight matchup. Geno Smith and Russell Wilson, they're even in games. Russ leads in TD to interception ratio and QBR, and the teams had pretty even success overall. Neither team made the playoffs. The Seahawks were 9-8. The Broncos were 8-9, but it really is just overall, it kind of felt like Geno was more steady. Russ had the really bad start to the year. They got blown out by the Dolphins, had a lot of losses. They looked to be one of the teams that might be tanking for Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, but then they sort of started to click some things into gear, and then they tailed back off at the end of the year, losing to the Patriots. And that really was the end of it for Russ. They went to, I don't even remember who they started the last week. Of the 66 starting quarterbacks this year, there was a lot of them in there. But I just thought Geno was more steady overall. Russ had probably the higher highs, but also for sure the lower lows this year. So I went Geno Smith with this second round matchup to move on to the Sweet 16. So that will do it for part one of the 2023 NFL QB bracket. Make sure to come back for part two on Thursday, starting with the third round, going all the way through the championship game.